Good afternoon. A big welcome from me to the Accounting Telematics sessions for 2016. This afternoon, learners, I'll be going over inventory, which is a very important chapter in the grade 12 syllabus. Okay? So it's going to be inventory. So if you have your telematics workbook, it's the accounting. We're looking at activity number 8 and hopefully activity number 9. Okay? Before we do over there, we first have a look at the overview of the inventory. Okay? Important things you need to know. It will first be the inventory systems, which is the difference between the periodic inventory and the perpetual. So I need to know the periodic, which is that one on top, and also I need to know the perpetual. Okay? Then the difference between the inventory system and the valuation method is we were doing 3 valuation methods. The first one was first in, first out, or just short, FIFO. Then we were doing the weighted average, and then the third one was the specific identification method. Okay? So it's 2 inventory systems, but 3 valuation methods. And because we're busy with inventory, we need to know at least the following 2 financial indicators regarding inventory. The one which is the stock holding period, or the number of days stock on hand, or the stock turnover rate. Also one that normally comes up is the percentage markup, which is just the gross profit over your cost of sales times 100 to get the answer in percentage. Okay? So if you move on to activity number 8, they're giving us information. It says we're going to do it according to FIFO and weighted average. Right? It says you're provided with the information relating to a tennis club, which is called Tennis Classics. This business, they sell tennis rackets. So you have one item, which is a tennis racket, and another item, which is tennis balls. Chris Wimbledon owns the business. The business uses the periodic inventory. So immediately, if I see that periodic, then I will know that cost of sales will consist of my opening stock plus my purchases plus my carriage on purchases minus my closing stock, and then that will give me my cost of sales. So we will come back to this. It's just as soon as I see periodic, there will be a calculation for cost of sales, which will be the opening stock plus the purchases plus the carriage on purchases minus the closing stock, and then that will give me the cost of sales. Okay, so what does this activity say? It says this business has 2 products. One is tennis rackets, the other one is tennis balls. They're telling me, refer to information A. If I go to the information, it says for information A, here we are. It says inventory is valued according to the following methods. For tennis rackets, I'm looking at first in, first out. And for tennis balls, I'm looking at the weighted average. So the question is situated as follows. On the one side, you have all the information regarding tennis rackets, and then on the other side, you'll be having all the information regarding tennis balls. Okay? So you must make sure that when you're working with the figures, you are working with the correct product, first of all, and you're getting the information from the correct side. Right, so the first question that they're asking us is, refer to information A, briefly explain why it is appropriate for Chris to use the FIFO method for tennis rackets. Okay? If I look at the information for tennis rackets, right, I can see that the tennis rackets, the cost price varies from 600. If I go under the purchases, then it goes to 560, 600, 675, 675. Compared to that of a tennis ball, which is 720, and then they're giving us the figures in dollars later. So we have to convert that, but right on top it says 720. So now they're asking us, why do we value the tennis rackets according to FIFO and the tennis balls according to the weighted average. Okay? So when we go for the tennis rackets, we can say it's a more expensive item. It's more expensive, right? Not many. Was bought or sold. Right. We also had different purchase prices. Right. So it will be easy to keep track. Of the items bought and sold. Right. So just for the tennis rackets, it says it's a more expensive item. Not many was bought or sold. They have different purchase prices. It will be easy to keep track of the items bought and sold. Therefore, we chose FIFO for that one. Okay. Then for the tennis balls, right? It is less expensive. Okay. Thousands was bought and sold. It won't be easy. It won't be easy to keep track of the items bought and sold. Therefore, we chose the weighted average. Okay. All of that information I will be able to get from the information that was given. Okay. The first part we said was that the tennis rackets is more expensive. So you can see they're starting with a cost price of 600 Rand per unit. Then it went from 560, 600, 675, 675. So it's a more expensive item. Not many was bought. In other words, we only bought 75 every time. And also not many was sold. We only sold at the bottom. There we can see 185. Okay? That's why we said it's a more expensive item. Not many was bought or sold. Right? It will be easy to keep track of the number that was bought and sold. That is why you chose the FIFO method for that one. Okay? Compared to the weighted average one, we started with 1,200. Right? It's less expensive. It was for a tennis ball. Right? Thousands was bought and sold. You can see we bought 3,000 at a time and a total of 12,000. And we sold 10,500. Okay? So it will be difficult for us to determine that 10,500, which tennis ball was sold at a particular time. That is why we chose the weighted average for that method. Okay? So let's hope, learners, that when we get a question like that, you just have to look at the information and then the answer will come like we had it over there. Okay, so let's move on to question 8.2. Now it says, calculate the value of the closing stock for tennis rackets. When it says calculate the value of the closing stock for tennis rackets, according to FIFO, FIFO means those tennis rackets that was bought first must be sold first. Okay? It also means that the closing stock, the item that we want to calculate, is made up of the items that was bought last. So we want to determine what is the value of the closing stock according to the FIFO method for the tennis rackets. So if we look at the tennis rackets, so we have to look at the closing stock, so we have to look at the information for closing stock. So there it is. Okay, that's my closing stock line over there. It says on the 28th of February. On the 28th of February, it says we have 205 tennis rackets left. But also, now I need to value. We need to find out what is the value of those tennis rackets. But what it says that we have 205 tennis rackets left. Then also, under information C1, it talks about the tennis rackets that was made in South Africa, and the transport for each tennis racket was 35 Rand. So besides the normal cost of the tennis racket, we also paid transport costs, which we classify as carriage on purchases, 35 Rand per racket. Then it gives me a total of 10,500 was bought for the 300 tennis rackets that we bought. Okay? Now, where does the 300 come from? If we look at the purchases, that's the 300 over there, right? And for each tennis racket that we bought, we paid an extra 35 Rand for the carriage on purchases. Okay. So now we have to determine what is the value of the tennis rackets that we have at the end of the financial year. So we have 205 tennis rackets. Okay? According to FIFO, it says the tennis rackets that was bought first must be sold first. So the tennis rackets that we have left will be of the stock that we bought last. Okay? So let's find out how many did we buy last. So by the information, by the purchases. What was bought last? Okay? Bought last. The 75 that we bought last, that was bought last. Right? That was bought last. Then also, that was bought second loss. That was bought third loss. So when we start with the 205, we bought loss 75, and the total value of that 75 was 50,625. Okay, so we bought loss 75. The total value of the cost price was 50,625. But it still doesn't make up the 205. So what we do, we go to what we bought second loss. So second loss, we also bought 75. And that gave me a total value also of 50,625. So far, we have 150. But we need 205. So those two together, the 275s, that gives me 150. So how many do I still need from the batch that I bought third loss to make up the 205? So all we do now, learners, we take the 205 and we minus the 150. So when we go to the calculator, it's 205 minus 150. That gives me 55. So of the items that we bought third loss, it will be 55. Now we have to determine what is that the value. Third loss, we paid 600 per item. So now we have to say 55 times 600. And that will give me the 55 times the 600. That will give me 33,000. Okay? So the item that we bought third loss is going to be 33,000. Right? So it's 75 that we bought loss, plus another 75 that we bought second loss, but I need to make up the 205. So it's going to be 205 minus the 150, gives me 55 of the items I bought third loss. 55 times the 600, and that gives me 33,000. But besides the cost price that I paid, I also paid for the carriage on purchases for the tennis rackets. And for each tennis racket that I bought, so I paid the extra 35 Rand. So the closing stock, the 205, they cost me an extra 35 Rand. So now I have to include that in the value as well. So if I just clear my calculator, so it's going to be 205 multiplied by 35. That gives me 7,175. Then I will just total that 3, and then that will be those 4 figures, and that will be the answer or the value of my closing stock. Okay. So just again quickly, we're going to make up the 205. So it will be 75 of the items that we bought loss, then 75 of the items that we bought second loss. Those two 75s gives me 150. 205 minus the 150 gives me 55 of the items that was bought second loss, right? And for the item that I bought second loss, I paid 600 Rand a racket, so it's 55 times 600 gives me 33,000. Then also, for all those rackets, I paid an extra 35 Rand carriage, so now it's going to be 205 times the 35, which gives me 7,175. So if I total that, learners, I will get 141,425. Okay, so that will be my closing stock, or that will be the value of my closing stock for the tennis rackets. Okay, so you must just remember for FIFO, we start what we bought loss. If it's not enough, what we bought second loss, that wasn't enough. So it will be what we bought third loss. We multiply the values, we look for carriage on purchases, and we multiply the price of the carriage, and then we add those figures together, and that will be the value of the closing stock. Okay, I see Tarek and Burger, they have 141,425. Well done. I see everybody so far, they have the figure of 141,425. Well done, learners. Thank you very much for staying and participating. Well done to getting the closing stock. The catch, the thing that we have to remember is that carriage on purchases will increase the cost price of the value of the closing stock. That is why you have to add that. Well done for those learners that got it. Right. Now they're talking about tennis balls. It says, calculate the value of the closing stock for tennis balls. Okay. Now what the question is doing, they're asking us, one, if I can determine the value using FIFO. Now they're asking me for a different product, can I determine the value using the weighted average? So the weighted average just means what is the average price, then you multiply with the number of units that you have at the end, and then you'll get it. Okay, so just once more quickly, you try and get the average price. Once you have the average price, you multiply with the number of units that you have at the end, and then you'll get the total value of the item. Okay, so it'll be very easy. But in this question, you have to watch out because they are giving us the figures in rands. Not in rands, they are giving us the figures in dollars. And our reporting currency is rand. So first of all, we have to convert the dollars into rand. Okay, and at today's prices, it should be a bit pricey. Okay, so where do I get this information from? It says tennis balls under the information C2. There we are. Right? Tennis balls. It's imported from the USA. Prices are quoted in US dollars. The exchange rate, R8.50 to a dollar. R8.50 to a dollar. Then also it says import duties is 20% of the rand value. Right? So I must remember the 20% because the import duties is because we are getting it from the USA, we have to pay the import duties. Okay, so in the information by the tennis balls, here you can see they're giving us the rand, the dollar value. Okay, so I bought 12,000 tennis balls and we paid $11,250. So I need to convert that figure into rands. And for every dollar, it's going to cost me R8.50. So I need to multiply the 11,250 with 850. So it's 11,250, that is the dollars, multiply 8.5. That gives me 95,625. Well done again to Burger and Tariq. I see you guys are on top of your game. Okay, so that figure will be 95,625. So that will be the total purchases. Okay, you don't take the dollar figure, you convert using the conversion rate that they gave you, so it comes to 95,625. So that is the figure that we'll be using in our calculation to determine the weighted average. Okay, so now we have the 95,625. Now we can go ahead and determine the value of the tennis balls using the weighted average. Okay, so how many tennis balls did we have at the beginning? We had 1,200 tennis balls. Just remember, we're looking at the right-hand side now for the information on the tennis balls. Okay, so the value of the tennis balls of the opening stock was 8,640. Plus whatever we purchased. Remember, we bought 95,625. Okay, what else do we need? The question says that we paid import duties, so we have to add the import duties, and the import duties was 20% of the rand value. So once I have the 95,625, I must still go and calculate 20%. So the import duties, it says 19,125. Okay, so that will be my opening stock. Plus the purchases, but I had to convert the purchases, I had to convert the dollar figure into rands, plus my import duties. Okay, so now I want to get the weighted average, so I need to divide by the number of units. So how many units was 8,640? The information says 1,200. And how many units did we buy for tennis balls? We bought altogether 12,000. Okay. You must just remember that the import duties and the carriage on purchases doesn't carry any units. That is only the amount that we use to pay for the transport. So that doesn't carry any units. So when I add and divide that, right, so that will come to 123,390 divided by 13,200. 200. Okay. Then the answer is going to give me the weighted average of 1. In other words, now I will determine what is the value of 1 tennis ball. In other words, I only want the value of 1 tennis ball. So in order for me to get the value of 1 tennis ball, I take the total value, which is 123,390, divided by 13,200 to get to the weighted average of 1. So it's going to be 123,390 divided by 13,200. Right, so that gives me R934.77. So that is, but because we're only working with 2 decimals, I'm going to round that off now. So now I'm going to say that the weighted average is approximately, that's with the squiggle, 935. So what does the 935 represent? The 935 says it is the average price of 1 tennis ball. But that is not what we want. We want to know what is the value of all the tennis balls we have at the end of the year. That is only the value of 1 tennis ball. So now I still have to take the weighted average of 935 and multiply by the number of tennis balls that we have left at the end of the year, which is 550. Let's just go back to the information so that you can see where we get the 550 from. The 550 is right there. It says the 550 is the value or the number of tennis balls that we have left at the end of the year. Okay? That is why what we say now, we take the value of the 1 and we multiply it with 550. Okay? So once we have the value of 1, 935, and we multiply it with 550. Right? Then we're going to get an answer of 5,142.50. Okay. If we want to round off, we can then take the answer to 5,143. As long as you write the original answer first, and then we can see that you were rounding off, whether it's going 1542 or just 5143. Okay, so that will be the final answer. Okay, let's just recap on that one because it's quite a mouthful. In order for me to get the weighted average of 1 item, I take the opening stock, the value, plus the purchases. We just have to remember that they did not give us that figure. They gave us the figures in dollars, and then we had to convert the dollar figure into rand figures because our reporting currency is rand, plus 20% of the rand value. So we just remember that figure was 20% of the rand value for the import duties. Right? That's 1,200 units, and that's 12,000 units. The import duties doesn't carry any units, so it will just be the sum of those 3 figures divided by the sum of those 2 numbers at the bottom. We got a decimal of 934.77, and then we rounded it off to 935. 935 is then the average price of 1. So it's still 935 multiplied by 550 gives me an answer of 5,142.50. Okay, right. Well done. I see Siamandla also has the answers exactly, as well as Martha. Martha was just rounding up. And Matsabani, again, Tariq and Burger. Well done, guys. Okay, well done. And as long as just remember to stay in tune so we can still complete this exercise. Okay, well done, guys. Right, we move on. What do they want now? Now it says for tennis rackets. Okay. But remember guys, you need to use the correct figures in order to determine the value. Let's not get confused, it says tennis rackets. Now you must not use the figures for the tennis balls. We only want the tennis rackets. So in the information, it will be all the items on the left hand side. You need to use the tennis rackets. Okay, so let's see what's the information. Tennis rackets, right? What does it say? So I need to look at the figures on the left hand side. Just remember, there was carriage involved, so we're going to need that carriage. Okay, we started that. We said that for cost of sales, because we're using the periodic, we're looking for opening stock plus the purchases plus the carriage on purchases minus the closing stock, and that will give me the cost of sales. We now went to go and determine the value of the closing stock already, so we have all those figures. Okay, so let's go and get this easy. This would be easy now. Right, so here we go. The opening stock, the value for tennis rackets. Okay, as in the information, it says the opening stock 54,000. So it's 54,000 plus what is the purchases? 188,250. Very careful learners, you need to check the information if there was any returns. If there is any returns, then you must remember to minus the returns from the purchases. Okay? In this exercise, there is no returns, but what we do have, it's the opening stock plus the purchases, and then it says minus the value of the closing stock. But before you do that, you must just make sure that you don't forget to add the carriage on purchases. So it's going to be the 54,000 for the opening stock. 188,250 will be the purchases, plus 10,500. Then it says minus the answer that you got earlier for tennis rackets. There we go, minus that figure. So it's minus the 141,425. Minus 141,425. Okay, and then the answer will be the cost of sales. Okay, so here we go. So it's going to be 54,000. I see the answers coming up already. Let's just check. 54,000 plus 188,250 plus 10,500 minus 141. Oops. 141,425. What do we get, guys? 111,325. Well done. Everybody's got it. Cost of sales 111,325. Well done, guys. Okay, so now we have the cost of sales. So it will be the opening stock plus the purchases. Just watch out for returns. Then you have to minus the returns. Okay, carriage on purchases minus the closing stock gives you the cost of sales. So now this will be the cost of sales. Right? Right. Once you have the cost of sales, it says calculate the gross profit, okay, which is just sales minus cost of sales. That means the information must give us the sales. So in the information it says tennis rackets sold, sales 166,500. Okay. That will be by information E. Minus the cost of sales that we just had to calculate now. 111,325 equals the gross profit. That will be 55,175. Okay. Well done. Well done, guys. Okay, so it's going to be the sales minus the cost of sales, which was the figure that you calculated earlier. Okay, so there we go. So there we have everything regarding the tennis rackets. So we have the cost of sales. Earlier you had to calculate what was the closing stock. So that figure came from 8.2. That was the 8.2 part, right? So you've got that. It's the opening stock plus the purchases. Just remember there might be returns. Then you have to minus plus the carriage minus the closing stock gives you cost of sales. Gross profit, sales minus cost of sales gives you gross profit. Okay, that's at the end of 8.3. Let's see what else do they say. Okay, but now it says calculate the VAT. Okay, calculate the VAT charged to customers on the tennis rackets sold. So we have to look at the VAT. So we have to calculate the VAT, and we all know that the VAT is 14%. The information says that the sales figure of 166,500 is exclusive, right? So the VAT that we have to calculate will just be 14% of that number. So we just have to multiply that with 14%. Then we should get an answer of 23,310. Okay, I see Kim Linus also got the answer. Well done. Okay, so that will be the VAT that we have to calculate. Right. So then it says calculate the markup percentage on the tennis rackets. So this will be one of the financial indicators that we have to know. Okay, so the markup percentage, it says gross profit over cost of sales times 100. Okay, so it's just the gross profit over the cost of sales times 100. We have the gross profit. We calculated that earlier. It was 55,175 over the cost of sales. We also calculated that earlier. 111,325. We multiply with 100 and we express the answer as a percentage. So it's 55,175 divided by 111,325. We multiply the answer by 100. Gives me 49,56. Gives me 49,56%. Okay, so it's almost a markup of 50%. Okay, well done. I see Martha, she rounded it up to a clear 50%, as long as you wrote the original answer first, and then you can also say more or less 50%. But the original answer was 49,56. Okay, well done, guys, and thank you for participating so eagerly. Okay, the next set of questions is talking about internal controls and what you need to do regarding the popularity. Okay, as you can see, it says it's a lack of popularity of tennis rackets. So if it says it's a lack of popularity, then it probably means that the tennis rackets are is not that popular, and it's not being sold as fast as we have envisaged. Okay, so there's a formula that you can work out which says it's the number of days stock on hand. Okay, so you can do it with the figures, or you can also do it with the number of units that we have. Okay, so I will do it with the number of units, and then we can do it with the figures afterwards, and then we can see. Okay, so as soon as it says the lack of popularity, then what you can work out is how many units are we actually selling. Okay, so what we are saying is that we had available for sale. So for that we need the information, and that will be regarding the tennis rackets. Okay, We started with 90. Our opening stock was 90. Right? Then we bought 300. So we actually had 390 available for sale. So what we had 390 available for sale. But we only sold 185. So of the 390, we only sold 185. So now we want to see in terms of percentage, how many of the goods available that we had did we actually sell? And if we multiply that out, we will get to an answer, right, of 47%. In other words, only 47% of the items that we had we sold that. Okay? Which means we have lots of stock left. So our stock on hand is not moving. Okay, the stock that we bought is not being sold as fast because we only sold 47% of the stuff that we had. Another way of doing it is we can find out how many units did we actually sell. Okay, another way, it was 205 units is what we had left. Right? So what we had left divided by the number of units that we sold, and then we multiply that by 365, and then we see how long is the number of days that we have our stock on hand. In other words, that's the 205, that's the 85. How long is it going to take for me to sell the 205 because I only sold 185? The answer of that will come to 404 days. In other words, it's going to take me 404 days to sell the stock. The financial indicator that you can use, it will be the average stock over cost of sales times 365. Okay. So where do you get the average stock? Remember, it is tennis rackets. So the average stock will be the value of the opening stock for the tennis rackets, which was 54,000. Remember, it was a half, so it's average. So it's 54,000 plus the value of the closing stock, which we can calculate earlier. It was 141,425 over the cost of sales, which we also calculated earlier, which was 111,325. Then you multiply that with 365, and then you get an answer as the number of days for stock on hand, which will then also come to more or less to 404 or 403 days. Okay, so that's the financial indicator that you can use. It's the average. That's why we have the half in front. 54,000 is the opening stock, plus 141,425 will be the closing stock, and then we divide by the cost of sales, and we multiply it with 365, and then we get the value of that. Okay, so that will also be the number of days stock on hand. It should more or less come to the same as the answer that we got on top over there. Okay, we're just using a different method. Okay, then also by 8.4 it says we must make a calculation regarding the theft of tennis balls, which means that there was tennis balls must have been stolen because we can't keep track of the movement. It's not easier, right? Because thousands was bought and sold. So it's easier to steal a tennis ball than to steal a tennis racket. Okay? So this business has a shoplifting problem. Okay? So what we need to find out is how many tennis balls were stolen. Okay? It's a simple calculation, but it will not be the value. It will be the number of units that we have on hand, and also it will tell us how many units, and then we know exactly about the internal controls that we can put in place in order to prevent them from stealing the tennis balls. Okay. Let's just check. No, it will be the number of, no, it will be the 205 on top, and then it will be divided by the 185. Okay, I see it says we're supposed to divide by 205. No, it will be, the 205 will be the stock that we have on hand. So it will be how long is it going to take us to sell that stock. So it will be 205 divided by the 185, and we multiply that by 365. 365 representing the number of days that we have. Okay, okay, right. Then it says make a calculation regarding the theft of the tennis balls. So for tennis balls, okay, our opening stock, remember we're not working with the value, we are now working with the number of units of tennis balls. Okay, so we started with 1,200. Then we bought 12,000. Right? So we had 13,200. Right? Then we sold 10,000. That's the opening stock plus the purchases. That gives me 13,200. Then we sold 10,500. We sold 10,500. Okay, we sold 10,500, which means we should have left the difference between that two, which is 13,200 minus 10,500. Okay, it should be 2,700. So this 2,700, that had to be our closing stock. Okay, but the actual closing stock that they are giving us is 550. So now we say 2,700 minus 550. That gives me 2,150. So 2,150, that is how many tennis balls are missing, which is quite a big number if we look at it, because we're buying stock at batches of 3,000 and 2,150 is missing. Okay, just again quickly, just to make sure we're not working with the value, but we're working with the number of tennis balls. Okay, so it's going to be the opening stock, so it's 1,200 plus the 12,000, and that gives me 13,200. We had 13,200 available for sale. We sold 10,500, so our closing stock should have been 2,700 units. But the actual closing stock was 550. So it's 2,700 minus 550, we get 2,150. So that will be 2,150 tennis balls that's missing. Okay, well done. I see everybody's getting the 2,150. Okay, then the last part, they're asking us, explain 3 strategies that you would implement in this business were you to become a partner. So the first item that I'm going to talk about is I want to implement internal controls to prevent theft. So in other words, I need to prevent theft. Right? So I need to safeguard. I need to safeguard the stock against theft and loss. Why? Because 2,150 tennis balls is stolen. Okay, what else can we talk about over here? It says that the tennis rackets are made in South Africa. Remember, the tennis racket is not that popular. It's only 47% was being sold. So maybe we must think of importing the tennis rackets. Because the ones that we have, the clients don't prefer that one. So maybe we should import the tenors records to satisfy the customer's needs. Okay. Then also, it says that we are importing the tenors bills. So it would be easier for us to look for a locally supplied or locally manufactured tenors bills. Then we don't have to buy so many, right? And then we can prevent the theft. Okay. So what we can avoid stockpiling, because we're buying the tenors bills in batches of 3,000. We're buying the tenors bills in batches of 3,000 balls at a time. Okay? So if we're looking for somebody that's manufacturing it locally, we can avoid the stockpiling, then we don't have to buy 3,000 tenors balls at a time. Okay. Right, so I see everybody's got that. Okay. Right, learners, let me just check. Okay, we've got the prevention. Right, so just remember, a good way is you will always have to calculate the items that was missing. What you can also remember is that cost of sales is equal to cost of sales, but in units. Okay. Sales and cost of sales in units should be equal. If they are not equal, then you know there will be items that was missing or items that were stolen. Okay. Just once again, I want to thank everybody that was participating. Right. Well done to you guys. I see most of you got the answers right. It's a very important chapter for the matric syllabus. Should be in the matric exam. From my part, all I have to do is to wish you well for the upcoming June exams. And thank you very much for staying this afternoon. And well done to you guys that got the answers. Well done. Thank you. Goodbye.